Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at clauses. And I have one concept that I want you to hear right off the bat, which is that as I introduce you to, or rather remind you of what a clause is, keep in mind that a sentence can be made up of one or more clauses. So that's it. When we talk about clauses, we're not talking about sentences. Because English sentences can be short, like, I love Pokemon, and you'll see soon that this sentence has one clause. But English sentences can also be really long, like, even though I love Pokemon, I don't collect Pokemon trading cards because they're expensive. And you'll see soon that this sentence has 3 clauses. Okay, so again, the word clause is not a synonym for sentence. Now, in another video, you learned a little about noun phrases. And as part of that investigation, you learned about nouns, pronouns, adjectives, determiners, prepositions, and prepositional phrases. If you want a refresher on some of these concepts, I'll provide some links in our course and also below in the video description. Here's what you're going to learn in this video. A clause is made up of a noun phrase plus verb phrase, and English is a subject plus verb plus object language. If this is confusing, don't worry. We're going to scaffold our way to understanding these 2 concepts in this video. When we looked at adjectives in another video, you saw that in English, we kind of have a tendency to follow an order in which we use adjectives. So we noticed that it sounds odd when someone says something like red big fire truck instead of big red fire truck. At the adjective level, we like things in a certain order for the most part. This is an important concept that underlines what we're currently looking at in English. When we're looking at things like nouns, adjectives, verbs, clauses, and the like, we're studying a field of linguistics called syntax. And in the field of syntax, we look at word order. We use this investigation of word order to understand why some things sound or read better than other things, why some things are considered grammatical in one language, but maybe not grammatical in another language. Why you think ate at Burger King I doesn't make sense or isn't as easy to understand as I ate Burger King. We're currently investigating the importance of word order in English and how it leads to intelligible speech and writing, meaning utterances that everyone in the same language can understand. Word order can impact meaning, and word order can change meaning. Saying Tom loves Kate means something completely different than Kate loves Tom. These 2 sentences are virtually identical. They're both noun plus verb plus noun, but you've got to agree that the meaning changes when we simply invert the nouns. That's because in English, meaning can be tied to word order, among some other things. Now let's talk about clauses. You actually already saw a few clauses, whether you knew it or not, in Tom loves Kate, Kate loves Tom, and I love Pokemon. Each of these is a clause. They're not clauses because they're sentences. They're clauses because of the order of words. And what's the order? Well, in Tom loves Kate, we see a noun plus verb plus noun. In Kate loves Tom, we see the same thing. And in I love Pokemon, we see pronoun plus verb plus noun. Well, let's look at a few more examples. What about I bought it or they ate sushi? What word order do we have? I bought it is a pronoun plus verb plus pronoun. And they ate sushi is a pronoun plus verb plus noun. So what sort of pattern do we see here? We looked at very simple clauses in English, and in these cases, they just so happen to also be sentences, but disregard that fact. These are each clauses, and what patterns do we see in these examples that gives us some insight into what makes up a clause in English? Go ahead and pause the video so you can think about it. I hope you noticed that each clause started with either a noun or a pronoun, and that each clause has a verb, and that each of these particular clauses also ends with a noun or pronoun. I emphasize these clauses because you'll see a little later that a clause doesn't have to end with a noun or pronoun, but for now, we want to look at how they can. So when we're talking about clauses in English, we're talking about chunks of words that fit this description. Noun or pronoun plus verb plus noun or pronoun. Okay, take a second to make note of this formula. A clause starts with a noun or a pronoun. A clause has a verb. A clause can end with a noun or pronoun. And in this formula, I put parentheses around the noun and pronoun that follows the verb because, again, it doesn't have to be there. Okay, let's step it up a little more. I'm going to introduce you to a new formula that still obeys the formula I already showed you, but helps you understand more complex clauses. So we just said a clause is basically a noun or pronoun plus verb plus noun or pronoun, but that is a simplified formula. When we say that a clause starts with a noun or pronoun, we're really saying that a clause starts with a noun phrase. And when we say a clause can end with a noun or pronoun, we're really saying that a clause can end with a noun phrase. So here's your new formula. Noun phrase plus verb plus noun phrase. Are you tracking that? A noun phrase, as you learned in a prior video, can be a singular word, a noun or a pronoun, or it can be a cluster of words. So if we take this new formula and apply it to some of our original examples, you'll see the formula still tracks as far as what explains a clause. Tom loves Kate is a noun phrase plus a verb plus a noun phrase. And I love Pokemon is a noun phrase plus a verb plus a noun phrase. So when you learned about noun phrases, they were to set you up for understanding more about clauses. Let's look at some longer noun phrases. A boy loves me. That kid stole the candy. And baseball players love practical jokes. Initially a little intimidating because there are more words, but let's analyze them. A boy loves me. Boy is a noun, and loves is a verb, and me is a pronoun. So this still follows our rule that a clause can be a noun or pronoun plus verb plus noun or pronoun. So it's a clause. But take note that the first part of the clause is a boy, not just boy. We have this determiner a before boy. So we have to take into account that the whole noun phrase. Next example, that kid stole the candy. That kid and the candy are both noun phrases. The words that and the are also determiners. Finally, we have baseball players love practical jokes. And here we have the noun phrases baseball players and practical jokes. Baseball and practical being adjectives and players and jokes being our nouns. So what you're seeing is that in a clause, we're not just looking for the nouns or pronouns, we're looking at the whole noun phrase. It's still the same thing I stated earlier. A clause starts with a noun or pronoun and contains a verb, but we're interested in the whole noun phrase. Now we can describe a clause as noun or pronoun plus verb plus noun or pronoun. We can also describe them as noun phrase plus verb plus noun phrase. Let me blow your minds again with another formula. Noun phrase plus verb phrase plus noun phrase. We're going to call the verb a verb phrase. We're going to call this a verb phrase because just as a noun phrase can be one word, such as cat, or multiple words, the big fluffy cat, a verb phrase can also be more than one word. We can have one verb such as is in he is happy, but we can also have more than one verb such as will be in he will be happy, and was eating in the cat was eating the mouse, and will be going in I will be going to the store. So this is the reason we want to look at verbs as verb phrases. So we said that a clause is a noun or pronoun plus verb plus noun or pronoun. We can also describe them as noun phrase plus verb phrase plus noun phrase, but we're going to now start calling it something else. This whole time we've been exploring the word order of English, and we're highlighting how word order works in English. So keeping these two formulas in mind, we're now going to call it subject plus verb plus object. English is a subject-verb-object language, and everything we've looked at thus far was to get you to this point. So with our new formula, let's look at our prior examples and see how this formula makes sense of our previous clauses. Instead of seeing words as either noun phrases or verb phrases, we're going to conceptualize those as either subject, verb, or object. So Tom loves Kate, subject, verb, object. Kate loves Tom, subject, verb, object. I love Pokemon, subject, verb, object. I bought it, subject, verb, object, and they ate sushi, subject, verb, object. Now, I also added a new example on this slide, he ran, which you'll notice is just subject, verb. So what new patterns emerge that help us understand what forms a clause? I hope you're seeing that what makes a clause is a subject and a verb, and sometimes an object. Every English clause has a subject and every English clause has a verb. Remember that. The key to identifying a clause in English is to be able to identify the subject and the verb. I hope you're also noticing that the subject always comes before the verb. The subject in English never appears after the verb. It's always before. And I hope you're remembering that the subject is always a noun phrase. In order to know what the subject of a sentence is, you have to be able to identify nouns, pronouns, and verbs, and you have to be able to identify full noun phrases and verb phrases. So that's why we started by looking at clauses through those lenses before we got to this discussion. So again, I'm trying to train you to identify a clause. Okay, up until this point, we've used some really simple clause examples. Let's explore some lengthier examples and see if you can identify whether or not they are clauses. Let's start with, the fluffy cute kitten clawed the mean ugly dog. Is this a clause? Let's analyze it. Initially, it's a little overwhelming because it contains a lot more words, but if we look closely, we'll see that it is a clause. So to form a clause, we need a subject and a verb at minimum. And we know from the examples we looked at already that the subject has to be a noun phrase and it needs a verb or a verb phrase. One way you may want to start is to try to identify the verb, because we know the subject is always before the verb. So looking at this clause, the fluffy cute kitten clawed the mean ugly dog, what is the verb? What is the action or the state of being? Well, that's going to be the word clawed. That is our verb. So now that we identified our verb, we want to find our subject, and we know that the subject always comes before the verb. So what occurs before the verb clawed? The fluffy cute kitten. So the subject of our sentence is the fluffy cute kitten, which is also a noun phrase. So our subject isn't just kitten. Our subject is the whole noun phrase. Our verb or verb phrase is clawed. And we can see that this sentence also has an object, which is the mean ugly dog. And we know this is an object because it is a noun phrase. Let's look at one more. I didn't like that class. Here we have the pronoun I, so that's our noun phrase and our subject, followed by a couple verbs, didn't like, or spelled out would be did not like. And I'm showing you an example with the word not to show you that not is part of the verb phrase. So if the clause had been, I did like that class, then did like is the verb phrase, and thus didn't like is also our verb phrase in this clause. Then our verb phrase is followed by that class, which is a noun phrase and thus the object of our clause. So English is a subject-verb-object language, and this order is really important because order impacts meaning. Whatever you have in the subject position is really important to the meaning of the sentence because the subject is the one performing the verb. That's why Essie hit Myland has a different meaning than Myland hit Essie. Who or what is in the subject position makes a big difference as to whether or not I'm going to be mad at my daughter for hitting my son or my son for hitting my daughter. So English is a subject-verb-object language. But believe it or not all languages operate this way. Now let's look at the different types of ways you could create a sentence or clause in different languages. There are 6,000 different languages in the world, and 75% of them will order their sentences in one of three ways. It could be that you put the verb first, then the subject, and then the object. A few of the thousands of languages that do that are Irish, Egyptian, and Arabic. And for an English speaker, it would sound really strange if we were to take a clause and say, hit Essie Myland. That sounds strange for us, but not for people who speak a verb-subject-object language. And you can imagine if you grew up speaking Arabic or Irish and you're used to putting the verb in the beginning of the sentence, and then you're studying English, there may be a tendency for you to front the verb, to put the verb in the beginning of the sentence. Then you have subject-object-verb sentences. German, Albanian, and Chinese or Mandarin do this, French as well, but it's more flexible. So the clause would be Essie Myland hit, and that would make perfect sense for the languages that have that word order. Now subject, verb, object. This is how English and languages like Hebrew, Greek, Polish, and Spanish form clauses. That's why Essie hit Myland sounds better to us and is more clear because we're used to it. But it is important for us to understand that clauses are put together in other ways in different languages. I want to quickly highlight that we have a few exceptions in English when it comes to how the subject is expressed in a clause. For example, when we give commands, we say things like, go home, buy that, don't do that. And here you'll notice that the subject isn't explicit in the clause, but it is there. These clauses are really, you go home, you buy that, you don't do that. In this type of utterance, it's normal for us to not explicitly state the subject, and we're fine with that in English. So multiple times I've also alluded to the fact that not all clauses have to have an object. We know in the clause he ran that we have a subject and a verb, but we don't have an object. I can also tell you that the clauses he ran over there and she fell down the stairs also don't have objects. In another video, we're going to look closer at what an object is. Right now, I don't need you to know why over there and down the stairs are not objects. We'll look at that in another video. At the beginning of this video, I told you that a clause is not a synonym for a sentence. We have clauses that are a full sentence, such as Tom loves Kate, but we can also have a sentence made up of multiple clauses. So let's explore some sentences that have multiple clauses. Tom loves Kate and Kate loves Tom. Here we have a sentence that has two clauses. We know that there are two clauses in this sentence because we have two subjects and two verbs. We have our first subject, Tom, followed by the verb loves, then followed by the object, Kate. Then we have another clause, which is Kate, our subject, followed by the verb loves and the object, Tom. So in this sentence, we also have the conjunction and. We use conjunctions like this one to join clauses together in a sentence. Because right now we're just trying to identify clauses, we don't consider and as part of either clause. Its function is to hold the clauses together. So notice here how even though these two clauses are in one sentence, we could technically write it as two sentences. Tom loves Kate, Kate loves Tom. Let's look at another example. Yesterday morning, Tommy and Dave bought coffee, but Jen and Judy bought pastries. So again, we just want to find the clauses, but at the sentence level, we're going to see other words that don't necessarily have to do with finding the clause. Here we see this chunk, yesterday morning, and we know that's not a clause because it doesn't have a verb. This is an adverbial phrase. We're not going to explore what that is right now, but what you need to know is that it isn't a clause because a clause always has a subject and a verb. Moving on in the sentence, we see a few clauses. We see Tommy and Dave bought coffee. So Tommy and Dave are in the subject position of this first clause. Remember, the subject is everything before the verb, and you can't have more than one subject. As we do here, Tommy and Dave are in the subject position. Then we have our verb bought, followed by the object coffee. This clause is then connected with another clause through the conjunction but. So after but, we have another subject, this time Jen and Judy, followed by the verb bought, and then the object pastries. So this sentence has two clauses. Just like our last example, notice how if we got rid of the excessive words, we could write these two clauses as individual sentences. Thomas and Dave bought coffee, Jen and Judy bought pastries. Okay, let's look at one more. Since the kids didn't have school yesterday, they hung out at the park while their parents attended the PTA meeting. So we want to identify the clauses in this sentence. Looking at the first chunk of this sentence, since the kids didn't have school yesterday, we want to figure out if this is a clause or not. So we need to see if it has a subject and if it has a verb. And even though it's lengthy, we do in fact see that it has a subject, the kids, and a verb, or in this case two verbs, didn't have, spelled out as did not have. So yes, we do have a clause here, and that clause is the kids didn't have school yesterday. We're not including the word since as part of the clause because it doesn't have anything to do with the structure of the clause. It's just operating as a word to organize the sentence at large. Then we have the rest of the sentence. They hung out at the park while their parents attended the PTA meeting. You'll want to read this one carefully for nouns and pronouns and verbs, which will help you identify the clauses. So we immediately see the pronoun they, followed by the verb phrase hang out. So we know right away this is another clause. They hung out at the park. Then we have this word while, and this isn't part of a clause because again, like the word since, it's just there to organize the sentence. It's just part of how we structure sentences. And the word while is a conjunction that is joining another clause to the sentence. And that next clause is their parents attended the PTA meeting. And just like our last two examples, notice how we could take out the excess words and basically have three sentences. The kids didn't have school yesterday. They hung out at the park. Their parents attended the PTA meeting. Without the excess words, since and while, the sentences lose some organization, but what I'm highlighting for you is simply that clauses can stand on their own as their own sentences, essentially. So that may be one way for you to think about clauses as you work to identify them in speech and writing. Okay, so you already speak English. Why do you even need to know about clauses? Why is this investigation useful to you? Well, it's important to understand that clauses are the building blocks of an English sentence. You need to know how structure and meaning are conveyed in your language in order to communicate efficiently and effectively. Understanding clauses can have major implications on your writing. For starters, the more you understand clauses, the more you'll know how to avoid run-on sentences, sentence fragments, and comma splices. We didn't cover everything about clauses in this video. For example, there are such things as independent and dependent clauses, which when understood will help you understand how to better shape sentences in writing, but we're on our way there. Thanks guys, that's all for this video.